Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
For something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Joy would seem to be an unlikely emotion in a world increasingly filled with uncertainty and the fear, anger, and anxiety it creates. The noted figures of the Dalai Lama and the late South African Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu emphasized we can access and experience joy even in the face of great suffering. In this episode of Challenge 2.0, we connect with faith leaders from Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam who offer guidance of finding joy, even when it seems least likely. Well, joy and accessing joy seems like a very timely topic right now, and we have three very experienced teachers, both in terms of what your experience has been with joy, but also how you help other people access it. And I thank each of you for joining us. First, I'd like to introduce Reverend Danae Ashley. You are an Episcopal priest.
Yes.
And you have a counseling practice called Soul Spa.
Yes, Soul Spa Seattle in Shoreline, and I am delighted to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then we have Sue Zappel, and you are a Buddhist teacher, and you are with the Seattle Insight Meditation Society, and I understand you were early on the ground floor of that as well.
Yeah, I've been with Seattle Insight since the beginning. I've done almost every volunteer job except any of the tech stuff.
Well, I leave that to others
Yes.
as well, so I get that.
Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. And a very familiar face on this program, and we're always very blessed to have you with us, is Imam Jamal Rahman, and you are with the Interfaith Community Sanctuary. I visited that up in Ballard, and is very influential and helpful for so many people. So
Thank you. I'm very delighted to be here.
thank you so much, Jamal. When we think of joy, I think for many people, they think of joy and happiness as being the same thing. Agree, disagree? How would you distinguish the two? And whoever would like to begin that discussion.
Well, I can begin because I love talking about this with my clients and with people who are needing pastoral care. So for me, what I see, the deep connection of joy is to our meaning and purpose and the divine. And without that deeper connection, there can't be the joy. And I look at it like it's a river. And so on the surface, there's all the emotions that happen and the happiness and the sadness. There's all those party boats. If you are a follower of contemplative prayer, there's party boats on top of the river. But the happiness and the storms and all of that kind of stuff happens on top. But deeper underneath is this current that you can tap into, and that is the joy, and that's the current that propels us forward. So even if something sorrowful is going on at the top, you can still access the joy, which is an overall emotion, but also way of being.
Suze, what would be your take on that?
So even though in Buddhism we're not a deist religion, and it's funny that the Buddha is quoted as saying, I teach one thing and one thing only, is suffering and the end of suffering. But there's so much joy in the teachings. And like you were saying, Danae, the happiness, we all seek it. The different experiences, the party boats, whatever. But underneath is really that we're so connected to what's important in our lives, our moral compass, our belief and understanding that we're all connected and people want the same thing, and our decision to do no harm and treat people well. When you practice the non-poisons, the poisons are greed, hatred, or anger and delusion. And when you practice generosity, goodwill, and clarity, there's a lot of joy there. And so we're fairly similar, even though from two pretty different traditions.
And it feels like it's very like deeply internal, like that
Yes.
that internal sense of, for me, the divine and that connection. And then happiness is more like external. There's different things coming out.
And the Buddha, in the teachings, the Buddha talks a lot about distortions of mind, and one of them is thinking we're seeking joy, but we're really just seeking temporary pleasant feeling. And we go, oh, that's nice, but we understand what it is. It's not that deeper sense of connection with nature, with other beings, with what's most important in our lives.
Jamal, I know you've actually been teaching a course on joy. What have you been telling the people that are participating in that in terms of joy versus happiness?
You know, we've been using that book called The Book of Joy,
Right.
by Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama. And you know, as a Muslim, I must say that, you know, the word Islam literally means to surrender in peace. And the question is, what are you surrendering? And we are surrendering the attachment to the ego. So joy really is, you know, a feeling of contentment, inner peace, hopefulness, but it is rooted in what that book would say, cultivating qualities of the mind and heart. What in all the traditions is called doing the inner work. You know, transforming the ego from a commanding master into a personal assistant, opening up the heart. So it's a state of being. Whereas happiness, it's wonderful. It exists in joy also, but it's dependent on external factors. If things are going my way or not going my way. So it can fluctuate. So it's a state of mood, you might say, dependent on external factors. That's the difference.
I know that each of you teach with that authority that comes from personal experience. And when we were talking before, I asked you, could you share an experience of joy where you experienced joy despite not being in circumstances that would lend themselves to happiness or suffering? And I'm wondering if you could share those with our viewers right now. Suze, I might begin with you.
Well, I actually have two, but I'll start with the most important one. So I was partnered with a wonderful man for 35 years, and he went out for a run one day 7 years ago, had a rip in his aorta, and was gone. So my world flipped upside down, and that was in late September. And I live right on Lake Union, and so I was walking along the canal. And it was one of those amazing Seattle days where there's lots of clouds, but the sun's coming through the clouds. And I sat down by the canal, and the water was sparkly, and there were boats going by, and there are all these people, and they're laughing. And the thought came to me, what's missing in this moment? And the answer was nothing. It was a pure moment of joy at the same time that my heart had broken open from sadness and grief. And I never had had anything quite like that before, but since then it has kind of taught me that doorway is always open. So I'll just stop with that one.
My husband and I have permission to share this, we went through a lengthy journey of fertility struggle. And it was just ups and downs for almost 6 years, and multiple miscarriages, recurrent loss. And in those times, it was the ambiguous loss that was really difficult, because it was like, when is it ever going to end? And will it end with the outcome that I want, that would bring me happiness, right? So within that, I've been a lifelong dancer, and what I found to be most joyful for me was to be able to dance within that time of ambiguous loss. And it was so embodied, and it was so connected to, again, what I feel like is joy, the meaning and purpose, and I felt close to the divine. You know, it was really important for me to experience that deep joy that I always feel with dance, because that is a part of God's message to me and God's love. So, yeah.
Jamal.
Yeah, I have a similar story actually. The death of my parents, who I was very close to many years ago. First, my mother came to visit me, and then unexpectedly, in 7 days, she passed away. And we were all so shocked. And when my father heard about it, he was in Bangladesh going to visit, come and reunite with my mother here. But before he could come, my mother passed away. And when he heard the news, he had a heart attack and he died. So that really was devastating. And I remember that one poetry I had read many times by Hafiz, 14th century. You know, something missing in my heart tonight has made my eyes so soft, my voice so tender, my need for God absolutely clear. So I've been, sharing this, doing this, preaching this in classes. But after my parents passed away, you might say, in reading that poetry, I moved from a knowledge of the tongue to a knowledge of the heart.
Right.
And I felt, as both of you were saying, a greater closeness to divinity in a way that I never experienced before. And I thought, my God, my parents have gone away. I was so close to them. I'll never see them again. And they've gone forever. This very shocking realization. But then I realized over the years that have gone by that I feel a greater closeness to them. So, that Book of Joy says that suffering, Buddhist, every tradition says that suffering is inevitable.
Right.
The Quran says that it's a world of opposites. There's joys and there is sorrows. So there will be sorrows, there will be difficult feelings. But all the sages say, Jamal, after you have healed that difficult feeling, that suffering, which is inevitable, the way you respond to that, the way you reframe it, is going to shape your character, and I'm quoting the book now, is going to sculpt the destiny of your life. So the way we reframe it eventually is a very critical undertaking in our lives.
As I've heard each of you talk about your individual experiences and how you met those, there's that element of the individual response. Is there also an element of working in community that can also help you develop that sustaining joy?
Oh, yes. I feel like yes. I have a lot of joy about this topic. Yes, especially for being an Episcopal priest, and we get a little snobby about our liturgy, but for good reason. These are ancient rituals that really hold those larger emotions, those larger events. And so, just using my own example, we would have ritual service for people who have been struggling with perinatal loss, miscarriage, infant death, anything that had to do with perinatal loss. And those services were so important to people to be able to come together and have a place to lament. But then, like in the Christian tradition, it's like, yes, we lament, and then joy comes in the morning. So having that space to lament, but also to connect with joyful hope, that, whatever will be, whether you build a family this way or that way, or go forward creatively or not in a different way, was to be. And so I felt like it was very important, at least in my tradition, that we do have communal ways, and I think ritual and rite are really important in doing that.
Certainly true in Buddhism. The three jewels, the three refuges we take is in the Buddha, a person who actually found freedom, not so much the person, but the process of finding freedom. The Dharma, all the teachings, and the Sangha, the community of people who practice and who study the Dhamma and who embody the teachings of doing no harm and taking care of each other. And the spiritual friendships. One of the wonderful things that I learned early on in the Sangha is, you'll talk to a friend and say, oh, there's all these really hard things that are going on, and they feel a lot of compassion for you. And you talk with a Dharma friend, and they not only have the compassion, but they also invite you to understand what's going on. And is it that I'm adding ego to the difficulty, like you were saying? How we respond to it, that would be how I would respond.
So I would say, in every tradition really, community is critical. In Islam it's called the ummah. There's a wonderful saying, a wall standing alone is useless, add to it other walls, it could support a roof, even a granary. And then I'm quoting Rumi now.
Two of my favorites,
Is there-
Hafiz and Rumi.
wonderful.
Yes.
And he goes on, only when ink joins with a pen can the blank paper say something. So we all desperately need community. But the question is, what constitutes authentic community? That's an important question. And if you look at all the different traditions, there are three main gateways, among others. One is there love between me and the member or members of what I call, what Rumi calls circle of love? So is there love? Number two, is there trust? Because without trust, there is not that willingness to be vulnerable. And without vulnerability, there is no real community. And the third one is, and this is very important in Buddhism, like when the Buddha was asked, Lord Buddha, tell us about community, he said, find friends who love the truth, who love the truth. It's also in Islam, Christianity, other traditions. So the third one is a love between me and members of my community, a love of truth, whatever that means, and living the truth. So love, trust, and truth, those are critical.
When we talk about community and how that's important, overlaid on our individual efforts, that seems to fly so much in opposition to what we see in society nowadays. The emphasis on competition, the belief that nice guys, nice gals finish last. How do we see about reconciling that? How do we end up convincing people that that's a better path forward?
I was telling Jeff earlier that this whole year we've been studying what is called the paramis. They're 10 qualities of heart, things like generosity, morality, truthfulness, renunciation, determination, kindness, that kind of thing. And in the practice of it, we're now in the last month, and people have been talking about the power of practicing with this. And for me, one of the things that I've been practicing with is what do I do when all the opposites come up? And I live in a commercial building, and I have a bunch of small business tenants, and I have these tenants right behind me who asked for some more storage space. And I could feel that little ego person going, but it's mine, And I could feel that stinginess. And then you go back to the teachings and your kind of central morality or ethics, and you go, I really feel better when I'm generous. I really just do. That little stingy woman is kind of icky. I don't want to hang out with her. So that the teachings, when you really are practicing with it and you feel the stinginess, or you feel the ill will or the hatred or the you're going to finish last, you're too nice, get it, and then there's another part of the mind-heart that comes in. One of my teachers says the Dharma does you, and I think that after a while our faith does us, it's there, and it's hard to ignore. I couldn't ignore how much I disliked that stingy person. And so I went towards generosity. It wasn't easy. It wasn't as if all of a sudden stinginess disappeared, but choosing the appropriate response, because it's not just something you read about or talk about one day a week. It's your life, and you're aligned with it. And so then you're not willing to stay with those things that don't lead you in the right direction. At least that's the way I experience it.
So, I would say that following what you were saying, what is the definition of competition from a spiritual perspective? So if you look at the traditions, they say real competition is not competing with the others. It's about competing with the highest and deepest within yourself. That is real competition. And then we know from all the different studies of religions, our own tradition, that, if I'm running after titles, running after money, there is no end to that. Like in Islam, they say, if somebody gives you 2 valleys of gold, you'll yearn for a third. The Buddha would say, even if the rain turned to gold, this would still not slake your thirst. But there's another important point I want to make, and I want to give the example of this, I forget his name, the Nobel Prize winner. When he won the Nobel Prize, a young girl wrote to him and said, you're so fantastic, I want to be just like you. And if you remember, because I've quoted this quite a few times, he wrote back saying, please, I beg you, I implore you, don't be like me. I yearn for titles, for riches, for being the best. I've destroyed my health. I'm divorced. I'm estranged from my children. Mm-hmm. All I really wanted was to be loved. All I was really yearning for was just to connect with that feeling of being loved. Mm-hmm. That's what I really wanted. So that can come from loving oneself and being in relationship with members of my community, my family and my friends. Mm-hmm. That's where love comes from. Being of service. Mm-hmm. That'll give me joy and love also. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, those points.
Thank you for that, for changing the way I was thinking about competition. That's really lovely.
Oh, thank you. We have to thank all those sages.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Jamal, I'm going to ask you to tell a story that you often do. I think you quote, is it Tagore that spoke about
service?
Service and joy.
Yes. To realize, and the Book of Joy brings it out very, very vehemently and repeatedly, that you'll find so much joy in being of authentic service. Mm. He said, I slept and dreamt, life was joy. I awoke and found life was service. I served and lo, service was joy. Uh-huh. So we have to actually engage in authentic service to realize that brings us so much authentic joy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In quick closing, and Susan, I know you brought a book. What would you recommend if people want to dive a little deeper in this topic?
Well, this particular book, Sylvia Boorstein is both a therapist and a Buddhist teacher at Spirit Rock. But I loved her title, Happiness is an Inside Job.
Good.
In fact, it all is an inside job. Mm-hmm. That's one of the first things to remember, is that we've got the capacity to not only feel that inside of us, but to share it and to come with that kind of heart space out there. She says, practicing for a joyful life. It's very accessible. She's very down to earth. And I found her right after 9/11 when she printed and posted this thing that she was not going to add any more anger to what was happening after 9/11. And we can decide to not add any more competition, violence, ill will, stinginess, whatever. And that can be our gift to the world. We're going to be aligned with ourselves, whether we call it the divine or freedom or honesty. That's what
Jamal and Danae, anything that you'd recommend? You just did the course.
Yes. I personally would love to recommend 2 practices.
Okay.
Based on actually a revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad in a dream, where God says to humanity, beloved one, I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the loving heart, pure loving heart. So 2 practices, in meditation as also in waking hours. What's the number 1? To tell the heart as often as possible, I love you, with feeling, unabashedly. And secondly, again in meditation, also in my waking hours, just to send out light and love to a dog, a cat, stones, to you, to everything and everybody. That'll connect me. Because we are all interconnected.
Yes.
Yes, we are.
So connecting with myself by loving myself, connecting with God's creation by continuously, as often as possible, sending out light and love. I recommend those 2 practices to foster happiness and joy.
Danae.
There's so many good things out there, but you've mentioned a lot the Book of Joy. If you have not read it or seen the documentary that came from it, it's wonderful. With the Archbishop Tutu and then the Dalai Lama, it's a wonderful resource. But yeah, those practices, they're so good. And I would say the gratitude journal. It really does help us connect. In my Christian tradition, there's this Ignatian spiritual examine where you look at the highs and lows of the day. What was life giving to you? What was life draining for you? And in that you discover, what is God calling me into? And so even doing just a very simple practice like highs and lows, it kind of shows you over time a pattern of where God is drawing you. And I think those types of practices are really useful in discovering joy and tapping into joy.
Danae, Suze, Jamal, I thank each of you.
Thanks.
And,
It was lovely.
this has been so wonderful. It's been a treat for me. I hope each of you, Jamal, you've
I've
been
enjoyed
back.
it.
I hope you'll join us again on another
Thank you
program
so
as
much.
well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Challenge 2.0. We hope you'll join us again next week. If you've enjoyed this program, found the conversations informative, interesting, and thought-provoking, and the visions of people from different backgrounds, faiths, or wisdom traditions inspiring, people who can disagree without being disagreeable and respect the essential human dignity of all, perhaps consider supporting our organization with a contribution. Your donation will not only support this program, but also the broader work of our nonprofit charitable organization, Paths to Understanding. Thank you.